speaking the truth in love. See, we've got the choice of whether we relate to people with the love that Jesus shows to us, or whether we actually allow the things that we've learned from the world about competition, about using power over others, about people having to live up to our expectations, and a sense of what's best for us can affect the way that we perceive what's happening and people's intentions and what's happening in the world. And to me, that's what Paul's talking about in this reading. He's also saying that we need to recognize the truth for ourselves. We need to be able to recognize when fear is the emotion that's actually guiding, influencing us. Because, and even the fear of never being good enough, fast enough, or smart enough, or being important enough, can be things that affecting the way that we feel ourselves. Watching human nature, though, it's interesting that even though there are times where we feel like that, it's so easy if we follow the way of the world of actually, when we find someone that we do have some influence and power over, that we don't always treat them with understanding, but sometimes we take the opportunity to exercise some power because that helps us to feel better. But this is not the way that Jesus related with people. Peace that God brings is not a peace that is based on God's control of us, but it's actually about us recognizing, hearing what God is saying to us and the inner promptings, and being aware of thoughts and feelings that are healthy and building on those, and what we do with the negative feelings, particularly those where of anger and negativity, and the effect that that has on us, and to be aware of when we are responding out of fear, anger, and negativity, and where we are struggling to love others, and where that's creating a barrier between us. Living a Christian life doesn't mean that we won't ever have those negative feelings, but it's learning how to identify those feelings, those moods, those behaviours, and being able to step back and look at them. Sometimes talked before about going up to the balcony, where we actually go up higher and look down on a situation and look at it a bit more objectively, rather than just looking at it through the lens of the feelings we're feeling right at that time. Being able to look at it from the point of view of the other person, being able to step back and looking at this situation in the way that God is looking at the situation. It's actually about self-discovery and learning some of the things that affect us. Of learning that from those times where we've been in front of the principal or the policeman or someone in authority over us, the fear and the anxiety that's there, and recognize when we're feeling those that our responses will be different than when we are feeling comfortable within our own being and comfortable in our relationship with God. One author, N.T. Wright, suggests on his commentary on this passage that with regard to our moods, that we see them flowing as it might be like a strong but willful horse. A strong and willful horse that needs to be reminded frequently of the direction we're supposed to be going in, and a tug on the reins to actually help it to turn in the right direction, or to pull back to slow down, or a bit of an encouragement to move forward. Depending on, at the time, how strong those feelings are, of sometimes just allowing ourselves to take the reins in that situation. Now, I've been reading a book during the week called Pursuing God's Will Together. It is sermon practice for the leadership groups. Because discerning, I talked about a fortnight ago, and as Di talked about last week, discerning is actually about recognizing what God is saying to us about a particular situation or understanding of what's happening around us. It's about being attentive to what God is saying to us in the events around us and with what's within us. And over time, the more we attune ourselves to God, the more we develop the ability to sense God's heart and God's purpose in a particular situation. And then to notice when God is prompting us, tapping us on the shoulder, where God is speaking to us through our heart, through our emotions and responding. In Ephesians, Paul talks about testing spirits. He talks about good and evil. And the definition in this book by Ruth is one that I found helpful. She describes good as being the things that move us toward God and his call on our lives. And evil is the things that draw us away from God. So the good is the things that draw us towards God, and evil is the things that draw us away from God. So part of the discernment in our relationship and what Paul is encouraging us to do is to recognize when God is calling us closer and how we might respond, and be aware of the things that draw us further away from God. Now, Ignatius, in his writings, described this inner dynamics of good and evil drawing to God and away from God as being consolation and desolation. Consolation and desolation. Consolation is the interior movement of the heart that gives us a deep sense of living, giving connection, life-giving connection with God, with ourselves, with others, and with our true inner being, our authentic self. Consolation. And that consolation is the sense of God's presence that we feel when we're in tune with God and with others, and we feel that closeness with God. Desolation, on the other hand, can be sometimes when we feel off-center, when we feel something's not quite right, when we feel turmoil, confusion, and maybe sometimes even rebellion. This desolation drains the energy from us, can lead to tension in our intestines and tears in our eyes. So consolation is drawing closer to God, life-giving. Desolation is drawing away from things that draw us away from God. Now, Ruth goes on to say that our body knows and is telling us sometimes things that our mind can't recognize. So sometimes when we're feeling tension or reactions in our body, whether that be anger or tension or stress, our body's trying to tell us something. And this thinking on consolation and desolation, whether those feelings are drawing us closer to others, drawing us to something we need to recognize for ourselves, is a visceral body experience that comes before emotion and affect. But they can speak to us and alert us to truth that's being sensed, maybe a truth that God is trying to reveal to us and to respond. Because my experience has been that sometimes when we fear something happening, when we can talk to God, when we can talk to a person that we're in stress with, that as we begin to talk about it, as we begin to allow God in, that stress can dissipate and be reduced as we begin to see a way forward that wasn't possible to see before because we're open to the truth. Now, those lilies that we had in the photo in the theme slide, that photo was taken on Thursday when the lilies were closed up. This morning when I had breakfast sitting in front of the lilies, one of the flowers had completely opened up. And of course, when the flower opens up, that allows bees and light to come into the center of the flower and allows for reproduction and pollen transfer and all those things that are an important part of life giving. You'll notice there's another lily on the side that's just starting to open up, and tomorrow it will be open. Where are we? Are we feeling a bit closed up at the moment because of fear or anxiety? Are we partly opening up, or are we open? Because as a community, there'll be times where we are in different places. And for us to recognize for ourselves what God's saying to us, and discerning what God is revealing to us about us, our relationship with God and with others, but also to be aware of God's promptings to other people, of when they are closed off, when they are feeling vulnerable. It's not a time to show our superiority, but a time to show the truth of love and of care, and encouraging them to be aware, to listen and to communicate with God and maybe with us, so that we might all open up together and be a community where the life-giving presence of God opens us up and flows from within us, so that we may be imitators of God, as Paul encouraged the Ephesians to be.